Well, it was a crash and burn today, typical from last Friday, only I guess for new reasons. And the blame was that Hungary now is crying wolf and has financial problems, and that leads one to believe that maybe that whole former Soviet Union out there that came to us from the fall of the Berlin Wall is in trouble. Because I remember when all that happened, we have a friend that over there that was in the government at that time, and he was telling us about how the Western Europe had felt so guilty after 40 years of problems with their cousins to the east and not doing anything about it, that they felt like they needed some economic reparations, and they had government programs and rebuilding programs that were just were the envy of all of us in farming, and some that were just outright ridiculous. Well, it looks like some of that's coming back to roost, and they're paying for this, but it makes you wonder whether Poland is the next, and the Czech Republic, and then one by one, that they all cry wolf. So that leaves a lot of the analysts that are out there wondering whether they're going to be able to buy as much food, eat as much meat, and so you've got that in the commodities. Plus, you have a general attitude recently of all the regulations and of the flight to or flight to quality or risk aversion, we call it, and that's contrary to what we had in 2007 and 8, really, part of 2006, but 2007 and 8, where we took grain prices astronomically high, where everybody wanted to be involved in some risk, and now after they found out it's a two-edged sword, they don't want to be risk averse. They want to be risk averse and put their money somewhere else where at least they've got equity, and so that is really making the matters confusing. And of course, last week we had China coming in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I was contending for quite a while that given the technical action of the markets that we'd probably go back down to $3.20 or maybe even $3 eventually if we could get this crop and if we had the acres done. And ironically, yesterday I started looking at the market and saying, well, when did we top this market last year? And it was a little later, but it was right around this time when one could sense that all you need is another planted acres report, and then by golly, we're going to get the crop in. And that's last year, looking for a need for a perfect year. And even though we didn't have it perfect necessarily until after the fact, we found out it was, we were headed lower into September, where we turned around to $3 when we heard about crop frost potential and that kind of thing. So this whole thing is going back to Act 2 perhaps, and coupled with the Chinese now this week in the export sales report saying, the government saying China didn't buy any corn at all this week, and there was a huge disparity between what was guessed to be the export sales of 1.1 million with a trade guess versus 180,000 tons, almost 80% less than what they had expected. And then, of course, here comes Hungary and the rest, and it's set up on itself. If this would have been 2 years ago, we probably would have been down 30 cents today. But so we've got new lows in corn, and now searching for a bottom someplace. And I think the technicians will say, well, if the conditions stay the same and we don't have a La Nina coming in, then we could produce 166 or 160. We'll break a record again, and you'll get that factored in. And I think at some point in here we'll do that. I looked at my cash bid for corn in northern Illinois, and we don't have ethanol plants, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't doubt that it's probably around 3.8, maybe 3.08 for cash corn. And for anybody that has cash corn in the bin and looking at 3.08, that doesn't work real well, especially last year's corn. And looking ahead, I look at it and saying, oh, if I've got corn in the bin and hadn't marketed anything by now or had some left at even 20%, I've got to question myself whether I want to sell this corn this early in the year with at least 60 days left. And if this is all the market's going to give me going forward, then I question how much fertilizer we'll use next year. And pretty soon I look at it and say, markets take things too high and too low. This is kind of ridiculous. We will build demand doing this. And it's really a debacle in the making of people that were in the market getting out. Ironically, wheat, which has got 1 billion bushels left over for each of the next 2 years, was one that was down the least. And I think that came from spreading and arbitraging and that type of thing, where I know a lot of traders were buying 2 corn and selling one wheat. So you can about imagine how they got hurt this week. So there was probably some unwinding of spreads I'm at the Board of Trade a few days a week, and I have a hard time finding anybody there that has a focus on anything. So this is all kind of playing out, and of course the employment situation was not anywhere near what they expected either. So we just got it from all fronts today, and with employment at 450 million, whatever, 450,000 increase, 411,000 of that was part-time workers in the census. So the market's looking at this, and they missed that one by about 250 to 300,000, saying what's really happening out here, and will we have the economy sustaining agriculture, and of course, in spite of the potential for having less meat on the marketplace now and in the future, the meat market took it on a hit too. So it looks like a wholesale convulsion took place, and we had been, as you know from listening to this, we've been pretty heavily sold over the past, maybe as much as 125% of this year, and even up to 40% of next year in soybeans. We slowly were getting out of this stuff the last few days, and timing is everything, but the last day, of course, now I look back at it and say, I wish I hadn't done it yesterday, but I started to look at this at some point. I'm going to get close to my corn payment, my CRC payment. If it's 85%, you take 85% of $3.99, and you're pretty close. And I started to advise guys just to start lifting some of their hedges for new crop. And we basically don't have any old crop beans left. There was a basis on this. Old crop beans has been abnormally high, and not because of China this time, but because the United States crusher is having a hard time finding beans to crush. And I find it hard to believe, because we know what the crop size was, and we know how much we're crushing. That has to be reported every week. We know the exports, that's reported. And so we have a pretty good handle on how many beans are left. Well, there should be sufficient beans, regardless of the carryover, to meet the supply of those crushers that need it. And yet they can't find it, and basis in some cases, I heard 30 over in Des Moines, which I don't know if that's ever happened before. So what will happen as it's happening at some point in time, these crushers can just say, if we can get China to cancel a contract of beans, that'll bring the price of beans down. That'll scare Jerry into selling more beans than his friends. And I think we'll listen for some of that to see what happens. We had a key reversal down in July days today, and so when those people that buy our beans and use them and crush them and so forth get caught snapping and don't have the supplies, there's a lot of things they can do. They can trade amongst themselves. They can cancel contracts. They can do a lot of things out there, and maybe all you got to do is promise China, I'll sell you those same beans back for $1 less. If you'll cancel one cargo, that just means they'll buy a lot more beans cheaper. So not a good week for us. We've had opportunities to sell, but again, we're down in these levels. I thought, where we'd be probably in the mid range of June. I thought we would fully discount a big crop and probably be in that $3 to $3.20 range. And at that point, I'd want to accept the risk for July and August, September weather. China kind of put that off a little bit and had us rally, and now we've exhausted all that. So I think we're on track now to look at potential of 10 to 15 lower and maybe 20 to 30 cents in beans. And wheat, I've kind of given up on wheat. You can make more money storing it than you can growing it. So I think wheat also has, going into harvest, has some downside potential, and we'll see what happens next week. But if things get wild early next week, I think I'm going to look at Monday and see how much follow-through we have and what happens over the weekend. I thought it was worth buying, so to speak, that information and weather to see whether we got somebody coming back in here with the heat of doom of gloom. We haven't heard that for about 20 years now, but it's about due, and maybe we get a rally back up again. But given all that, I think rallies by speculators and everybody else are going to be sold in this market.